Good morning. I hope everyone enjoyed our panel discussion this morning. Right now, I am pleased to welcome you to our breakout session. This will be our final breakout session for Cyburgh this year. At this time, I would like to welcome Eric Cornelius. He is the Chief Product Officer at iboss, and he will be presenting on Beyond the Buzzwords, clearing up the confusion around zero trust. So Eric, welcome.
Thank you so much. So great, really happy to be here. Thanks to everybody who joined. Quick background on myself. So my name is Eric Cornelius. I am the Chief Product Officer at iboss. Prior to that, I've done cybersecurity my whole life. So prior to that, I was the CTO of Cylance, which was a next generation anti-malware company. I was one of the original round of hires there. So I was there. Between there, we got purchased by BlackBerry, where I was chief architect. That was about 8 years or so. And then prior to that, I worked in all government stuff. So I started out as an Army civilian doing exploit development for the Army Research Laboratory. Moved on to the Idaho National Lab, where I did a lot of critical infrastructure stuff, and then moved on to the Department of Homeland Security, where I worked on critical infrastructure stuff, but kind of at the nation scale. And the reason why I think it's important for me to kind of touch on all that is because, your experience shapes who you are and how you look at the world. And, one of the key themes that I want to kind of bring across today is this concept of changing our mindset, thinking about things in the greater use case, and trying to understand why technology is built the way that it is. And then also, very similarly, to always consider the human element in what we're talking about. There's a ton of human stuff that drives our day-to-day. In fact, this whole kind of cloud transformation we're going through right now, which I'll be focusing on, is really driven by people. Okay, so we'll just talk about kind of where we are. I'm going to talk about one strategic concept and one tactical concept, zero trust and Sassy, and then talk about how we can leverage our understanding of humans and the good guys and the bad guys to really start making decisions that are good for our organization and for our future. Okay, so where are we? I love this picture. This is the IRS's official guide to the taxpayer journey, which I think is a lot like, trying to be a user in a corporate hybrid environment. There's just so many different apps we have, just different kind of things, and trying to be a security administrator of all of this stuff is really complicated and cumbersome. So I think it's a great representation. And it's a simple fact that the world we live in is a complicated place. Right. And a lot of times we end up not being able to see the forest because of all the trees. We're focused myopically on our own use case, and we don't really take the time to kind of zoom out to this macro level and understand what the internet really is and who's operating on the internet and what they're doing on the internet. Okay. So when we talk about the current state of network security, I always say it's a dangerous place out there. Right. And when we're thinking about our roadmaps for our companies, we really need to be thinking about what it is we're trying to accomplish, what's realistic for us, how much money are we going to spend on it, what kind of human capital do we have to allocate to the problems. And again, recognize that as humans, we love all this spy versus spy. We all think we're spies. We love the idea of China and Russia and everybody doing all this government level hacking kind of stuff. And what tends to happen is we focus too much on what I call security 2.0, right? And what people really need to do is focus more of their time on security 1.0. 99% of cybersecurity is the basics. And we'll touch on this point quite a lot. So again, part of this is, what I want you to take away from this point right here is to set a goal. Anytime you have a map, any sort of roadmap, you have to start with a destination. And a lot of people miss that, right? They just want to start doing stuff without having a clear objective of where they're trying to go. So with that in mind, we need to understand who are the bad guys, right? What are we really up against, and where do we fall as an organization with regard to our ability to defend? So on the very left here, you've got the script kiddies, right? These are people who are young, highly intelligent, not sophisticated or experienced enough to create their own tools. They're not writing exploits, but they are capable of downloading things like Metasploit and reading Google and, implementing little attacks. I spent a lot of time as a consultant, and I halfway jokingly used to tell my customers that if you get hacked by a 15-year-old, it's because you deserve it. And that just goes to show that as an enterprise, any enterprise with an actual security team is not going to have trouble stopping this kind of stuff, right? Then I say in the evolution of the threat actor, that kid goes to college, they discover politics, because that's what happens when kids hit college. They start to become politically motivated in their hacking. They fall into a category that we would call hacktivists, right? And these are people who might target you if you are a mining company or a forestry company or an oil company, or you're being environmentally against these young people's beliefs or other types of politics. Again, they don't have a lot of sophistication, maybe starting to write their own crude tools, but not very experienced despite being intelligent. Now that's kind of where it splits right here after the young hackers are hacktivists. There's kind of this fork in the road. Okay, you can assume these people have now graduated college, they might have an advanced degree, and you can go one of two ways. You can either go to the dark side, where I hear they have all the cookies, and that's where organized crime comes from. Okay, and the organized crime people that I'm talking about, this is like the Russian business network, these ransomware organized crime rings or syndicates, if you will. They're run like businesses. Okay, they've got help desks, they've got hotlines, they've got email tech support. They are in this to make money, right? Now, what I tend to tell people is that you should target these guys as who you're going to defend. If you're an enterprise, you should be able to have the sophistication in staff and in tooling to be able to stop the vast majority of these organized crime networks from compromising your environment. So that should be the stated goal, right? When we're talking about our roadmap. Now, the other side of this is the very far right, which is the nation state threat actors. And you should aim for detection on these guys. So again, aim to stop organized crime, aim to detect nation state. And the reason I say that is because if you have the unfortunate experience of being a named target of a nation state, you are up against government level resources, which means money and people. And I spent a whole lot of my life on this game, and you cannot stop a motivated government entity from compromising you, right? I mean, a threat actor is deemed to be a quote unquote full scope threat actor when they have the capability of supply chain interdiction, which is to say that a truck of routers or laptops destined for your office building could be stopped en route and could be modified with a little Christmas present that you are unaware of that compromises your environment. There's no way a business can play the game at that level. So let's aim to detect their activity, because once they're in your environment, they still have to do all of the same stuff, right? They have to spread laterally. They have to identify the data that interests them, execute their mission, exfiltrate data, whatever it happens to be. And you should be able to detect all of that. Okay, so talking about threat actors, we shall not forget the most dangerous threat actor of all, and that is us, right? That's the user. So I love Homer as my representative of the vast user base that exists out there, because they're trying to do their job, right? Homer doesn't know anything about computers. He's a regular guy. He has that little bird that just repeatedly pushes the any key or the yes key to keep on moving on through menus. And there's a couple of little things that I like to put out when it comes to Homer. And one of those is, you should assume that Homer is out to get your nights and weekends. Yeah, I don't have that on slide. I thought I did. You should assume that Homer is out to get you time-wise, right? Because the Homers of the world will do silly things and they will cost us a bunch of time. And as administrators, we tend to kind of stop thinking about our users there. But I would encourage you to go one step further and be a little bit more paranoid and recognize that there actually is a case in the world where Homer is there to intentionally hurt you, right? To potentially steal your intellectual property, potentially to make some sort of implant. I've seen many cases where a foreign adversary will put an employee in a target environment and have them legitimately gain access, because it's easier than hacking, which is actually pretty hard. Okay, high level takeaways from this. There's no such thing as ultimate cybersecurity, right? If you want it, you're gonna have to unplug your machines and throw it away. And that means that you need to be realistic in your defense goals. You need to communicate realistically to your board that you can't stop every single attack. And having the honest truth of where we are, what our capabilities are, and who we can stop is super important. And if you don't have the answers to those questions, then that's when you should start, where you should start your journey. Okay, moving forward, again, focusing on broadening our mindset here and trying to understand normal. Everybody is talking about, oh, this new normal, this COVID world. I would argue that, is there really a such thing as normal, right? Again, we're kind of looking through our own tiny little use case. Everybody who said the words the new normal, they're talking about this top right picture here, right? We're looking through this lens. Whereas if you were somebody who's working in the surveillance field, your life really hasn't changed, right? Your targets are still doing the same basic stuff. The internet's still doing the same basic stuff. The simple fact of the matter is we live in a world that is more interconnected now than it has ever been, and it is growing at a terrifying pace. Okay, everything is connecting to everything. So one of the neat opportunities I had at BlackBerry is this bottom left picture here. BlackBerry is deeply involved in the automotive industry, and I got this kind of look at the future of automobiles, and it quite frankly kind of scares me, right? We all see Teslas start trying to drive themselves, and now you've got a vehicle is just a collection of computers that all talks to each other. They talk to other vehicles, they talk to infrastructure. uh, it, it's sort of the world's best IoT sensor network that can be used for all the bad things that it will be used for, right? Any technology that can be used for good can be used for evil, and it will, right? So these are all really interesting use cases. You know, the doctor use case, can you imagine having surgery performed on you from a robot that could literally be on a different continent as the doctor, right? But the reason that I put all these use cases on this same slide is so that we need to realize that when we're using any sort of technology, it almost certainly was not created just for our specific use case, right? We might have apps and things that are software that's for us, but generally the underlying technologies that provide connectivity, that provide the network backbone of the world, they weren't created for us. So we have to realize that we're playing in somebody else's sandbox, and understanding how that technology works will really help us to chart a course going forward. So lastly, you know, we have to accept one of our human tendencies is to be resistant to change. And I don't know why we're doing this. I will, for one, tell you I don't like it. I do not like that we've got, you know, cameras everywhere in the world and that we're on camera 80% of the time when we're in a city, but we do need to accept it, right? And that means that as network defenders, there's going to be more crazy IoT things hooked into our network, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we may as well strive to understand what they are, how they work, and what we can do to use them in the most secure way possible. Okay, lastly, my prediction of the future is that, you know, this left picture here is sort of the epitome of global broadband coverage, just the ultimate panacea in technology. And how we're going to use it, it's Homer, right? We're going to use it to look at cat videos. So just keep that in mind, you know, that the way we as people are going to use technology isn't going to change all that much. So anytime you see a new technology, you should think about how humans are going to mess it up. Okay, again, big level thinking here. The technological innovation is never going to stop, and neither are the bad guys. They are super, super, super motivated. They care about their money. They're going to use all of the technology. The other thing there is that the more technology we have plugged in, it's interconnected, it represents a huge amount of attack surface. So it's actually getting easier every single day to compromise an enterprise, which is an unfortunate truth for us who have chosen the field of defense. We're all probably already gray, but we're going to start losing our hair too. But it's okay. Last bullet point here: the internet is held together with baling twine and duct tape. Never forget that, right? The interesting thing about the United States is that we are always on the cutting edge of technological innovation. So if you look at our power grid, in the 1970s, it was the most sophisticated power grid on earth. Well, now it's the same power grid from the 1970s, right? We've of course done some continual improvement, but it's basically patchwork. The internet is like that too, right? Don't ever forget that people still have old computers, they still have old switches. And so there are some portions of the internet that are super sophisticated and some portions that aren't. And there's a lot of dated protocols and there's a lot of insecure applications. And you have to interact with all of it as you're providing connectivity to your users. I'm just going to skip a couple of slides here so we can get to the meat of what we're going to talk here about, zero trust. So all of that kind of was meant to set us up for the strategic approach that I think we should all be taking, which is we need to align ourselves with a zero trust mentality. Okay, no matter what you've heard, no matter what you've read, zero trust is not a technology, it's not a tool, it's not a platform, it's not a compliance framework. Okay, zero trust is a design philosophy, and it's a really good design philosophy. It's predicated on the premise that compromises are rampant at every level of the stack. As somebody who spent a huge part of their professional career as a professional exploit developer, compromises are rampant at every level in the stack. I promise you this, right? When I was working for the government, I did over 300 boots on the ground incident response engagements. I had a tremendous amount of time to spend with clients who have been compromised by every level of threat actor. I've seen all of the tricks. And what we really learned is that there is no stopping a truly motivated threat actor, right? And we are really bound by the limitations of our imagination when it comes to hunting for these bad guys, defending against these bad guys. And they don't suffer, the bad guys don't suffer nearly as much from that lack of creativity. And so things that I've seen is, bad guys will come in, they'll compromise a machine, they'll put a rootkit or their persistence mechanisms inside the memory of your video card. And then when you go and you wipe the hard drive or you do an OS reinstall, they're still there, right? And you're not getting rid of them. And so again, you need to assume you're compromised. That's kind of the long story short about what zero trust is just assume compromised. And also, assume that the user is trying to do bad things. And anytime you operate with these assumptions in mind, you're gonna unintentionally allow only least privilege access. And you're really gonna be hard on that. So you should. Okay, so if we don't trust anything, what can we verify? Zero trust architecture is all about starting from the bottom up, right? And again, being true to ourselves, we need to understand what our capability is. If you have your incident response game set to advanced mode, then you should start with firmware, right? If as an organization, you have the capability to inventory the firmware that exists within all of your devices, understand that there is firmware management and update cycles going on there and keep track of all that, awesome for you. You are super sophisticated. The vast majority of entities simply don't have that level of capability. So we need to start with the operating system, right? Same concept, just one level of abstraction higher. What versions of OSs are we running? Do we know of any known vulnerabilities? Are they fully up to date? Do we have antivirus? Do we have disk encryption? What about local firewall policies? All of this kind of stuff that you can do on the endpoint is a good place to start. Now, remember, your users are wherever they are, right? They're all throughout the world. So we need a way to instrument that information. And then we need a way to communicate that to something higher up the stack that can make decisions about access based on those pieces of telemetry. Move up the stack, move on to the user. Okay, advanced goal here, continuous authentication. There's a lot of technologies out there that monitor how people type, right? How they interact with the keyboard. Fun fact that when you're typing, how long you hold down a key is called dwell time. How quickly you move between the keys is flight time. Your typing cadence is as unique as your fingerprint. I think mathematically, it's even more uniquely identifiable to you than your fingerprint. So there's a lot of companies out there trying to chase that goal. Again, it's high sophistication, it's high false positive, it's high overhead. It might not be the right goal for everybody. So let's start with multi-factor, and go from there. Once we've verified who the user is, we can then start moving up the stack and looking at applications. Right? Application use here, the goal is explicit control based on user device policy. Right? So keeping in mind that you might have a user who can access an app from two different devices, one of them corporate owned, one of them personally owned. You as the enterprise need to be able to differentiate when they're on that corporate device versus when they're on a personal device. And you need to manage by policy, hey, they have access to these types of capabilities when they're on a corporate device, and this smaller subset of lesser capability when they're on a personal device, right? Makes sense. Once we're done looking at applications, we can start to look at data. This is what everything here is all about, right? This is the goal. And what I recommend to people is they actually start a project internally called Operation Crown Jewels. Funny story from the field that happened to me repeatedly is we would go to an organization, and another fun fact, most organizations aren't actually the ones who determine their compromise. They're almost always made aware by some third party, typically law enforcement. So a huge part of my job was what was called victim notification. We would actually phone up people and say, dear sir or madam, I'm representing the United States Department of Homeland Security. We have reason to believe that you may be the victim of a data breach. Can I come in? And then everyone's, of course, shocked and awe, right? So tell them we think you're compromised. We're seeing this beaconing activity. First question that I get asked 99% of the times, what do the bad guys want? It's like, well, I know literally nothing about your business. I just did a Google search on you. You're supposed to tell me what the bad guys want, right? And it's that simple little fact right there that people overlook that makes incident response so hard. It makes cybersecurity and defense so hard in general, because if you don't know what's important to you, how is there any expectation that you can protect it? So my advice to everybody is to find out where your data is. Okay. And I think unfortunately what you're going to find is that your important data is kind of everywhere, right? Cloud apps are going to have copies of it. It's going to be on multiple different machines. This is sort of a tough beast to get your arms around, and the internet doesn't forget, right? Once data gets on the internet, it is very, very difficult to get off. So the goal should be identify what's important to you, identify where it is, and then make it really difficult for that data to get outside the boundaries of your control. Now you'll hear people say the perimeter is dead. That's not true. You still have a perimeter. It's just no longer your corporate office, right? Again, mindset issue there. Infrastructure, I made this point earlier. This is again about the underlying infrastructure that is the internet. I work with a lot of people who own data centers, who have, you know, their own links and all this stuff. And no matter how much infrastructure you own, it's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the vast amount of privately owned and highly intertwined and very complex and commingled infrastructure through which your data passes through all day, every day, right? All day, every day. This is even true at the app level. So now with modern microservice-based cloud apps, what happens, everything, it's an API driven environment. So you might put your data into a cloud app that's microservice driven, and maybe that third party didn't implement all of the microservices. Maybe they licensed one. So now your data is in a third party to a third party. And again, maybe they didn't implement their entire microservices. And so you've got this chain that just, it's really, really difficult to identify where your data is going once it hits these public cloud providers. So really be cognizant of that. Really use, all of the tools available to you in terms of encryption and, authorization and authentication and all that, to be sure that you're not trusting any of this stuff. None of it's trustable. Okay, so the takeaways from the zero trust section here is that it's not easy to implement a zero trust architecture. There's challenges all over, political and technological, right? There's a lot of behavioral problems with this because this is a new paradigm. Okay, the world is changing at a rapid pace here. We're moving to cloud. We're moving to things that we don't know, and it's hard. Okay, so move on to Sassy. So zero trust being the strategic goal, like how should we think about things? How do we actually tactically implement that? I recommend everybody adopt a Sassy platform. So what is that? Right? Again, I think I've beat on this point quite a lot. There is no cloud. It's just someone else's computer. Okay, so the story here of Sassy is one of rapid change. So we have all spent the better part of the last 30 years doing this thing on the left here, right? Building this castle with 2 walls and high towers and a moat. And, the knights had to ride across the drawbridge, and there's alligators in the moat. And we suddenly, in a very short amount of time, what happened was the knights had to go to work and dominate other castles, but they still needed to access their battle plans. So we created VPNs so the knights could, virtually come back to the castle to access their battle plans. But then one day, the knights started using battleplan.com. And once the knights started using battleplans.com, there was no more need to go back to the castle ever. And so they never did, right? And now all of a sudden, the king and the wizard can't see what the knights are doing all day long. They've lost visibility into their traffic and their application use. And they're really, really worried that those sensitive battle plans are ending up in someone else's saddlebags. So that's the exact same story that happened here, right? People would say that COVID caused this. I completely disagree, right? I personally have worked from home for 7 of the last 10 years. COVID may have accelerated this and catalyzed the adoption of these technologies, but it was definitely already happening. So the human element here is it's difficult for us to let the idea of this castle go. And kind of step one in cloud adoption is to admit that you're going to move to the cloud, which I think we all are. Okay, so what is Sassy? Sassy is referred to as a secure access service edge. And the idea is that Sassy is the interconnection of network as a service and network security as a service. So this is your traditional networking capabilities, right? But delivered through the cloud. Similarly, your traditional security capabilities. Anything you would do with an appliance in your office is now being done, but it's being delivered to you as a service from the cloud, which is really cool, right? I think we all agree that there's huge benefit to SaaS applications. That's why we use them all the time, right? You don't have to keep things up to date. You get features right on the fly. It's nice. So you're making it someone else's problem, which is my favorite kind of problem. Okay, so double clicking on Sassy, my argument is that the Sassy Edge is the new perimeter. We've talked a bunch, and I hear it all the time that the network perimeter is eroding. Oh, the network perimeter is gone. I've even heard that the network's gone. None of that's true, right? It's just that it's different now. So the idea here, the way Sassy works is you're typically gonna have an agent. So let's start down at the bottom. I don't care what kind of device you're on, right? This is important for the modern way that we work because we're on desktop servers, mobile devices, iPads, you name it, right? Chromebooks, we've got them all. So we need a way to track users across all of those devices, to enforce policy across all of those devices. All those devices need to connect into this Sassy Edge, right? Which is normally provided as a network, a cloud fabric, typically deployed through data centers all around the world. And what happens is you run through these containerized gateways that are sort of the virtual version of secure web gateways and proxies, and you get decryption and natting and all of that. And then what happens is you decrypt the stream a single time and you can employ all of these capabilities. So now you're right back to having CASB capability, DLP capability, malware detection, packet capture, IPS, IDS, all your two-factor authentication, all of that stuff you're able to provide on an individual's data stream, regardless of where they're from, right? Brave new world, super, super cool. Again, what's really important, and I highly recommend everybody stick with that zero trust mentality. Sassy's become a cool thing. There's tons of people out there trying to play this game now, right? It's a sort of an up and coming space. So if you keep that zero trust mentality in mind and really think about how are we ensuring security here, these are the two kind of big architectural options people have when they build a Sassy platform. On the right, this is basically what most people do. They create these huge gateways, big, powerful machines inside data centers, and then they take a ton of customer data and they commingle that data, which to me is crazy, right? My mom told me not to commingle my data. And the idea here is you don't want your encryption keys being stored in the same place where another customer's encryption keys are being stored. You don't want any of your sensitive data. You don't want your reporting, your sensitive GDPR, HIPAA, PCI data being stored on a machine. I don't care if it's in a separate database or whatever. I don't want it on the same machine at all. Another problem with this giant cube on the right is that everybody exiting the Sassy Edge is going to have the same IP address. And so it doesn't matter who you are, you're going to have a shared IP address. We'll touch on that in a second. This side on the left here, in my opinion, is the proper way to do that. And that's to have smaller gateways that provide all that capability we talked about, but are dedicated on a per customer basis. And I think that's really important because, again, I don't like to have a zero trust mentality, right? I can't trust anything. So I don't want my encryption keys. I don't want shared IP addresses. I don't want shared computing resources. I want that all to be specific to me. Okay, so again, why is all of this important? I think by adopting a Sassy architecture, we can keep the same paradigms because people are slow to change, right? For those of us who have spent the last 20 plus years doing cybersecurity, it's gonna be really hard for us to just abandon the mentality of how we think about security overnight. And so what a Sassy architecture allows us to do is it allows us to adopt a new stage of normal where our users are everywhere and they're on all these crazy devices. But we can still manage it the same way we would have. And that, again, that's really important. User-based, policy-based, really, really easy. Okay, so lastly, and we'll just cruise through this section really quick. I know we're up against time here. This is just sort of a takeaway. What am I going to do now? So now that I kind of understand that. And again, I ask people to think about use cases, right? Take the opportunity here to architect in a more simplistic way. This is a once in a lifetime event, this tectonic shift away from on-prem devices. It gives us an opportunity to simplify our architectures. And simple is simpler, right? It's easier to defend a more simple architecture than it is to defend these crazy complicated architectures. So let's be happy about it instead of sad. Embrace your users, right? I'm constantly hearing of people complaining about their tough use cases. These tend to be, I call them devs with admin and execs with attitudes. And there are two categories of people that almost everybody has, where you have to have some users with local admin and you have some people who think they're special. And then of course you've got those people who have itchy, clicky fingers. And instead of just ostracizing and hating these people, I think you should take a little bit of time to get to know them and understand their use cases. Because if you can solve their problem in a secure way, you're going to win the game, right? They're the ones that are causing these problems to happen in the first place. So let's just focus on the small things that matter. Okay, go with the flow. It's hard to swim upstream, right? The we understand that these things are happening, but all too often as enterprises, we get resistant to this new technology until it's been around for a while. The rest of the world is still moving on. So let's at least stay up to pace on what's happening. Because as I mentioned, this is a sort of a tectonic shift in this move to cloud. We're going back to where we all started, but it's happening all around us. Okay, lastly, 99% of cybersecurity is hygiene and discipline, just like real life. Surprise, right? Despite the fact that we know that all you need to do is have good hygiene and eat, burn more calories than you eat. How many people do you know that actually live that way? The exact same thing is true in cybersecurity, right? We know we should have good passwords. We know we should rotate them. We know all of these things, but a lot of time we choose easy over good, which it's a problem, right? We lack discipline. So that's one of those things that when you're looking at technology and trying to spend all this money, ask yourself how it's going to end up getting used. Is it going to be shelfware, etc.? Second bullet point, if it's hardware running software, it's a computer, right? We tend to get scared of IoT thingamajigs. They could be cameras, they could be sensors, they could be iPads, they could be Alexas, they could be fancy Nest thermostats. They're computers and they're connected to the network. So you need to start treating them like computers, right? Think about them, think about their exploit pathways, all of the things that are going to happen. And lastly, just, think outside the box. We're trying to solve a lot of problems, right? There's a lot of unsolved problems in this space right now. And if they were easy, they'd already be solved. So we need to be willing to hear new ideas, to honestly consider new ideas. And believe it or not, one of my favorite sources to stay up to the times is young people, kids coming right out of college, interns in college. For as much as we like to make fun of them, I see a ton of really good thinking coming out of young people because they don't have the same training scars we do, right? We've been around too long. We're all jaded. And so I think every security team should have a bunch of young kids on it for multiple reasons, right? One, they're very inexpensive. Two, we need to build the cyber workforce of the future. And three, we need to inject diversity into our thinking. So I think it's a great idea to hire young people. All right. I think we managed to get it done in roughly the time. I know it was pretty quick.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, so much. Does anyone have any questions? Just enter it into the chat and we'll ask the questions. I know we're just about out of time and ready for networking and then the closing keynote. Let's see, I don't see any questions popping up yet. All right then. Well, I think that's about it.